he's got the size and the talent that if something were to happen to Zach Moss, he would become the feature back in that offense, which is an amazing offense.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy Football Freaks. I'm Jason, he's Vaz, and today we're going to talk about how you can win your league by using some very, very cheap methods or cheap players, bargain basement players, because we're talking about handcuffs today and running backs that will cost you next to nothing, but could, in the right situation, help you win your league. Vaz, let's get started on this. Anything you want to add to what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I'll say that for the most part, you do not want to be buying running backs at this stage of the off season. Running backs is a very volatile position, and you don't want to be buying expensive running backs at this point because you know what? They get injured so frequently, and anything can happen. And like I remember last season, Alexander Mattison was being traded for like early second round picks, and we saw what happened there. He lost his job very quickly, and he was irrelevant. So I would say like if this is not the time to buy running backs for the most part. But that being said, there are a few guys I will talk about that I am buying at this stage. And the reason is their value is low. So they're cheap right now. And I will talk about this more later, but they have the size, the talent, and the potential to be the feature back if something in front of them like went wrong, like the Alexander Mattison situation last season.
All right, then let's start off with Chase Brown.
Yeah, so actually, I'll mention the three guys I want to talk about, and that's
Okay.
Chase Brown, J.K. Dobbins, and to a certain extent, Dameon Pierce. So actually, the two main ones are Chase Brown and J.K. Dobbins. Um, the reason I like buying these guys is, first of all, they're a little bit cheap, in my opinion. Chase Brown, he's worth a late second, early third. I don't know if I'm going to try to give up a late second for him, but if I can get him for any third, I will. And I'll tell you why. So at the present moment, in my opinion, he's the most talented running back on the team. Zach Moss is in front of him on the depth chart, but we know Zach Moss isn't that talented. And we saw last year that Chase Brown is more electric than
Moss.
no, I'm sorry, than Joe Mixon. He's
Hmm.
more electric than Joe Mixon was last season. Joe Mixon, he was used, as an inside runner and getting the hard yards, and which NFL teams really like. But Chase Brown has that potential to kind of take the top off. He's got the more home run ability, like the he can hit the 20-yard runs more effectively and more often than guys like Zach Moss can, right? So it's very possible that they'll be at a complete timeshare and that they could prefer Chase Brown by the time that like fantasy playoffs roll around. I think it's very possible because in my opinion, he's the more talented running back. And then he's got the size and the talent that if something were to happen to Zach Moss, he would become the feature back in that offense, which is an amazing offense. So he's got the potential to be a league winner if something happens to Zach Moss. And then the reason I'm buying him now, and the reason I'm suggesting buying him now, is because it's very possible he takes over the lead role from Zach Moss at some point in the season. So now might be the cheapest he's going to be. So that's why I would buy him now. And then same idea with J.K. Dobbins. People might be turning off this video when I'm suggesting to buy J.K. Dobbins because, like, let's be serious, the guy can't stay on the field. But when you look at that depth chart, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins are the 1 and 2 on the depth chart. And like, ask yourself who the more talented player is. It's definitely J.K. Dobbins. Like, he's definitely the more talented of the two. Gus Edwards is the running back that I know NFL teams like. He can pound the rock, he can earn the hard yards, he doesn't fumble the football, but he doesn't have that breakaway run ability. He doesn't have that. He's not great in the passing game. He's not good on third downs. He doesn't have the ability to hit a long play. To change a game basically. And I think J.K. Dobbins has that ability when he's healthy. So what I'm saying is that J.K. Dobbins has the potential to rise in value if he can stay healthy and if he can earn that starting role, which I think is possible. And then if something happened to Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins has the talent and the size to be an every down back for the Chargers. So I think he's a great handcuff. And I would buy him now because he does have the talent to eventually take over the starting role.
Yeah, and we certainly know that Harbaugh wants to run the ball. He's added to the offensive line. So certainly whoever is running the ball there should be in a good situation, and Dobbins could be that guy.
Now, I can't do it for you. The inches we need are everywhere around us. What are you gonna do?
Like! Subscribe! Subscribe! Let's talk about some of the other guys you've got on your list, including Mattison, who you've already somewhat talked about in a different way.
Okay, so yeah, I'll talk about two guys here, Dameon Pierce and Alexander Mattison. I want to group these guys together. They're in a similar situation as the previous two. The reason I've grouped them together is because I don't think they're as talented as the previous two. So Dameon Pierce has had a lot of opportunity to show his talent, and he hasn't. And then they paid Joe Mixon a lot of money, so they're going to give Joe Mixon every opportunity to be the feature back. But if something were to happen to Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce would probably be the feature back in that offense. But you know what? He could have beat out Devin Singletary last year. I don't expect him to beat out Joe Mixon, who I think is a better running back. So I'm not like rushing to buy him immediately. I think he can be bought later on. And then same thing with Alexander Mattison to a certain extent. I think we don't know as much about Zamir White. It's very possible that Alexander Mattison is a better player than Zamir White, but I think Zamir White gets the opportunity out of the gate. But it is possible that Alexander Mattison like outperforms him and earns that starting role. So these are two other guys I would consider buying right now, and their value is very low at this point. Alexander Mattison is worth a mid fourth round pick, so I think he's a valuable buy at this stage. And then Dameon Pierce is worth a late third or an early fourth. So if you can get either of these guys for a future fourth round pick, that's something I'm considering.
Okay, and a couple other guys you wanted to talk about, Allgeier as well.
Yeah, so Allgeier is a guy that I'm targeting, especially if I have Bijan as my handcuff, because he's definitely a handcuff. Like he's a good player. He's got the size to handle all three downs if something were to happen to Bijan, but he is strictly a handcuff. So I'm not willing to spend a third round pick if I don't have Bijan on my roster. But if I have Bijan, that's something I'll consider. If I'm a competitive team, if I have Bijan on my roster, I'll trade a late third round pick to secure that backfield with Allgeier.
All right, and Elijah Mitchell.
Elijah Mitchell, similar situation. I think he's a very talented player. He's got the size, he's got the talent to be an every down player. If something were to happen to CMC next season, they drafted Garendo, and I expect that they want Garendo to be that in the future. So I think it's a 1-year play. But I think, again, if you have CMC, or I mean, like if you can get Mitchell for a fourth round pick, because like let's be honest for a second, fourth round picks hardly ever work out. So I think if you can use a fourth round pick to get a premier handcuff like Eli Mitchell, then I would go out and do that.
All right, and David Montgomery.
Before we get to David Montgomery, I'd like to just mention one other guy, and that's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, CEH, a guy that has let so many fantasy owners down in the past, but KC didn't bring anybody back. It didn't bring anybody in, and they re-signed CEH, so they like him as the direct handcuff to Pacheco. And he's got the size, and he's a decent player. I don't think he's a great player, but he's a decent player, and I think he's a decent handcuff to Pacheco. So I think if something were to happen to Pacheco, who does run hard, who does put his body on the line every time he touches the ball, if something were to happen to him, I think CEH could handle the every down role there in Kansas City. And we've seen in the past, when given that opportunity, he can perform. And you know what? Right now, you can get him for a fifth round pick. He might even be on the waiver wire in some of your leagues. So definitely look to get CEH if you can.
All right. And then let's get back to David Montgomery.
Yeah, so David Montgomery is a guy I didn't really want to suggest on this list because I'm trying to suggest guys that are worth late third, fourth round, fifth round picks. They can get very, very cheap. But I think David Montgomery is one that I wanted to mention because if you can get him for a second round pick and you're a competing roster, you can play him even though he's in a timeshare right now. But I like getting him just because if something were to happen to Gibbs, he could be an instant league winner, like a top 3, top 4 fantasy football running back for next season. So I do like targeting David Montgomery.
Okay. And another guy that comes to mind, probably something similar to that, is Charbonnet, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, I didn't want to mention these guys because they're a little bit more expensive. And as I said in the intro, I don't like targeting running backs at this stage of the offseason. It's just too volatile a position. So I'm willing to spend like fourth round picks, late third round picks, some like receivers that are never going to see my starting lineup. I like to use these kinds of players, these kinds of picks on my roster to go out and get high end, cheap running backs if possible.
All right. Anyone else that you want to mention at all?
Yeah, I'll mention two other guys, and that's Ray Davis. If you haven't had your rookie draft yet, I'm sure most of you have, but if you haven't had your rookie draft yet, I would be targeting Ray Davis in the late third, early fourth round. He's going to Buffalo, and he's going to be the direct handcuff to Cook there, and I think he'll even get some touches early on, especially in the red zone. So I think his value could increase, and it'll be tough to get him if you don't draft him. I think people that draft him will want to hold him. So this is a suggestion more for those who haven't had their rookie drafts yet.
Okay.
And then,
Anyone else?
yeah, one last one, and that's Evan Hall and Trey Sermon. Please don't turn off the video for this suggestion. Yeah, so Evan Hall and Trey Sermon are the direct handcuffs to Jonathan Taylor. And the reason I'm suggesting them is because they're dirt cheap. Evan Hall was a sixth-round pick last year, and he might even, it's possible he's on your wire. I think it's very possible Trey Sermon is on your wire. I saw that he was only owned in 24% of leagues. And I think it's possible that Trey Sermon beats out Evan Hall for the backup role in Indianapolis. So I think if, check your waiver wire, and if Trey Sermon is there, he's a guy you want to pick up.
Okay, some good words of advice. I like it, and I hope you like it as well. If you do like it, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join our Facebook group as well as we continue talking about fantasy football there. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another edition of Fantasy Football Freaks.